Come on, everybody, get on the floor. Everybody walk the dinosaur all the way back to Ixalan. It's a fun place to be in case you weren't there the first time. It's got all kinds of wacky stuff going on with creature types. We got vampires and dinosaurs. What? And apparently like 30 different mechanics, at least according to these new cards from the news set. Did somebody say news set? Hi. I'm Deb from Mtg. We like it a magic, and it is the first day of Lost Caverns of Ixalan preview season, and we got about 1,000 some odd cards to cover. It is a whole bunch today, and I want to get to all of them. So let's go ahead and get to it. Roll the intro, and then we'll look at some cards. Intro. And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech. Ooh, we back. Quick note, make sure you sub to the channel. Do it now, because there's going to be a bunch more spoiler videos this season, and not just this one. Even though we're going to cover like 600 cards in this one video, there's going to be several dozen thousand more to cover. After that, we're going to be doing it for the next couple of weeks. So make sure you sub to the sandwich to get all that content. Don't you like content, Igby? Isn't content nice? Enough, though. Enough with that, because I've wasted enough time in the video where we're actually going to talk about, realistically, like 40 plus cards. So we got to go ahead and get to it. But, ooh, where to start? My good, sweet, gracious, there's a fly in here. Lord, son of Mary, wife of Jeff Goldblum, on a magic card. There he is, right there. I guess that's one of the things we could cover. I'm not going to. If you want to read it, there he is. Jeff Goldblum's on a magic card. It's fine. It's better than Hugh Grant. Whatever. I don't care anymore. I used to. Not anymore. But they've successfully beaten it out of me. But anyway, let's talk about actual magic cards. You play in standard. But again, question before I started that bit, where to start? I'm going to start with the returning mechanic that a lot of us know and is very easy to explain if you haven't seen it before. Let's look at the new Explore stuff. We got Miner's Guidewing, C-Node Scout, and Jade Light Spelunker today. Now, Guidewing is just a single white mana for a 1/1 bird with flying and vigilance. And when it dies, target creature you control explores. In case you've never seen this before, it's a decent little ability. You look at the top card of your library, reveal it to everybody, put the card into your hand if it is a land. If it's not a land, you put a +1/+1 counter on the creature that explored, and then you put the card back on top of your library, or you can elect to put the card into your graveyard. So a lot of value on this. A lot of us remember Explore pretty fondly. It's because it's a sweet little ability, right? Even if you don't get to draw, quote unquote, draw the land, you still get a beefier creature, and you get a choice of whether or not you want that card, or maybe you want it in your graveyard for other purposes because you're an evil person. So there's a lot of reasons that this ability can bring value, and it usually does it fairly cheaply, like on Guidewing here, which could be a nice little creature for like sacrifice decks. I think there's probably better options altogether, but flying and vigilance for just 1 mana, it could be worse. I mean, basically, if you have another creature out, then this either shares its power when it dies, or it draws you a card. And those are two like really sweet little things to have on a death trigger. So it does require having something out. You got to do a little bit of lifting, but not a whole lot to make this thing worth its while. But I don't know, it's kind of cool. I also like C-Node Scout. I like my 1-drop Explore things. This is literally a 1-drop Explore creature. It's just a single green for a 1/1 Merfolk Scout. When it ETBs, it explores. A lot of it feels like we were waiting the entire time through all of the last Ixalan block, spoiler season, both regular Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan, for just a 1-drop Explore guy, and we never got it. Now we finally get it, and it's a Merfolk, so it's actually a decent little creature type too. So you might have a 1-mana 2/2, or you might have a 1-mana 1/1 that draws you a card. Those are both awesome. That's actually really, really good. We also get to see Jade Light Spelunker. This is a single green mana and X for a 1/1 Merfolk Scout. When it ETBs, it explores X times. That is really, really good scalability. And I like that it can sometimes put like 2 cards in your hand for reasonably cheap, or it can just be kind of on curve. You know, sometimes it's going to be a 3/3 that puts a card into your hand for like 4 mana. And that's not bad. I like that it starts off as a 1/1, so it always feels somewhat reasonably on curve, right? Like a 2 mana 1/1 that drew you a card, sure. A 2 mana 2/2, sure. Like this is all decent, at least in the limited environment, but the scalability makes it a little bit more interesting for constructed environments, because late in the game I rip this off the top of my library and suddenly it can draw me a bunch of cards and be a reasonable threat, right? Like it can both become a 4/4 and draw me like 2 cards. And that's actually really sweet. So I like the, again, versatility. I guess the scalability on this is the key, but I'm not sure it ends up seeing all the standard play in the world. My initial assessment is that, but I also wouldn't be surprised if it did show up here and there. Being able to put a few cards in your hand and be a threat on the table is always going to be good. Well, let's keep it pushing because we got to look at map tokens next. Now, we already knew that map tokens existed because of the first look at Ixalan, but we didn't know what they did until just now. So let's take a look at Waterwind Scout and Spyglass Siren. Waterwind Scout is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 2/2 Merfolk Scout with flying. When it enters the battlefield, create a map token. Now, that is an artifact token. With 1 tap, sack this artifact. Target creature you control explores. Activate only as a sorcery. Now, big props to all those who said that this is what map tokens would do, and it makes perfect sense. I thought that it might have something to do with basic lands, and it kind of sideways does, right? You can explore, and that makes plenty of sense mechanically. I actually think this is a decent card, especially in limited where it's a Windrake with like massive upside, but probably no constructed play. Now, the one that I could see getting a little constructed play is Spyglass Siren. This is a single blue mana for a 1/1 flying Siren Pirate, and when it ETBs, you create a map token. So a 1/1 flyer that also gets you a map. That's an artifact. That's not bad. Kind of reminds me of like a Voldaran Epicure, and that is good company to be in. Any 1/1 that puts an artifact token into play, almost no matter what the artifact token does, can be playable in some archetypes here and there. It might be niche, but then again, it might not be, because just a 1 mana 1/1 flyer that gets you this kind of value, the potential to draw a card, the potential to get a little bit bigger. I mean, a 1 mana 2/2 flyer, it's actually going to end up being a total investment of 2 mana for your 2/2 flyer, but it's still not too shabby, especially if you have other ways to spend the map token. I'm going on way too long justifying this, and we have a bunch of other cards to talk about, but I think that 1 mana for a body and an artifact token, no matter what the token is almost always going to be good, and I think this card is no exception. I actually think that it's better than the average stuff that we get. It's maybe no Thraben Inspector, but it's still, I think, obviously, a pretty good Magic card. But Explore isn't the only mechanic in the new Ixalan set. Far from it, in fact. So we got to look at a bunch more of these. Another warning, there's so many freaking mechanics in this set, it's ridiculous, but a few of them do a pretty good job, just like Explore does, of capturing sort of the essence of Ixalan. Not just exploration, but the thrill of discovery. So what do we name the mechanic that explores that aspect of Ixalan? Let's call it Discovery. All jokes aside, though, good mechanic alert. We got to see Geological Appraiser and Hit the Mother Load today, which is a silly, overcosted red card, but Geological Appraiser looks okay. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 red for a 3/2 Human Artificer. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, discover 3. Discover is to exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card with, in this case, mana value 3 or less. Cast it without paying its mana cost or put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. This is a dangerous ability right here. I'm just letting you know, this 4 mana 3/2 always puts something else into play that's a non-land, and that's kind of cool. It's a little hard to predict, which is very red in terms of this ability, but still, depending on how you build your deck, which is kind of my favorite part of this new version of Cascade, right? You can just always hit a 3-drop with this. You don't have to worry about hitting a 1-drop artifact or a 2-drop little crappy guy or whatever. You can just play a bunch of, like, say, adventure cards as your 2-drops that actually have higher casting costs than 2, but they have like 2-drop adventure modes, something like that, right? So you'll never hit a 2-drop with this. You will always hit a 3-drop to go along with your 4 mana 3-power thing. And that actually seems like relatively powerful. And of course, if you have like Discovery 4, Discovery 5 things in your deck, then again, you can build your deck in such a way that you're always going to get like a free 4-drop, right? It takes a little bit more effort, but there are ways you can build a deck to always take the maximum advantage of this mode. But even if you're not doing that and you just hit like a 2-drop guy off of your 4-drop, that still seems really, really good. But let's move on over to Hit the Mother Load so we can see a ridiculous, goofy example of the Discover mechanic, but it's still a fun read. It is 7 mana, 4 and 3 red for sorcery with Discover 10. If the discovered card's mana value is less than 10, create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to the difference. Now, first things first, I should say that if you're going to pay 7 mana in standard in red to do something tangentially similar to this, you probably just play a tally. You probably just take the body on the table that's huge and hard to deal with and also gives you something for free off both libraries. You probably just do that instead. But this is a fun card, and I think it's fun that a tally can hit into this, and also it can hit into itself, which is a neat little thing to be able to do. But some of the time, it is just going to hit a 2-drop. It is just going to hit a 3-drop. You're probably not going to build your deck to be nothing but 10s. Probably, right? So, but I guess you can still hit like Portal to Phyrexia, you feel pretty good about that. You know what I mean? But you have to play like some 3 or 4 mana cards in your deck. So it's going to be likely that this is going to hit those instead of the giant thing you want to hit. But it does have a contingency plan. You get a whole bunch of treasure tokens if it does hit like a 3-drop, right? So it's cool to get like 7 treasures. That's neat, but you get them. You don't really get them till next turn because they come into play tapped. And I don't know. Maybe if you can parlay the getting of artifacts into some sort of benefit, then we can talk. But altogether, I think this is, again, just like a big, goofy red rare that we see in every set. It's probably bulk, but those are famous last words. Put that on my tombstone because this could be a good card. I'm not going to deny that. I'm just going to doubt it a lot. So let's move on to the other Discover thing that we got to see today, and it's lands. I just put Discover on lands. That's kind of neat. So let's look at Hidden Necropolis and also give you the knowledge that there are 5 of these. Every single color got one of these that's basically identical to this, but it creates the color that it is. So let's look at Hidden Necropolis as an example of this. It is a land with the type cave. We will more on that in a second. Now, this taps, sorry, for black mana, or you can pay 4 and a black and tap it and sacrifice it to discover 4 at sorcery speed. Again, all of these are caves, and they all read exactly like this. The white one, the red one, the green one, the blue one, they're all more or less identical. They all let you discover 4 for 5 mana plus a tap and a sacrifice. If you're doing the math correctly, that's having 6 mana sources out because this counts as one of your lands. So that's kind of a lot for Discover 4, but late in the game, being able to cash in a land to get like a non-land permanent guaranteed, like let's go. It sucks that it's sorcery speed, and boy, is it a lot of mana. So it's going to take like your entire turn, even if it's turn 10. It's kind of sucky, but still, if you got nothing better to do, this is a pretty cool thing to be able to do. Hey, while we're looking at caves, let me go ahead and show you Cavernous Maw and Cosmium Confluence here. That's just fun to say. Now, Cavernous Maw is a cave that taps for a single colorless mana, or you can pay 2 and have it become a 3/3 elemental creature till end of turn. It's still a cave land. Activate only if the number of other caves you control plus the number of cave cards in your graveyard is 3 or greater. So you have to have a bunch of caves out in order to make this a dude. Now, you might be thinking, what's the deal with all these caves? How are you going to pay them off? So let's look at Cosmium Confluence here, which does that. It's 5 mana, 4 and a green for a sorcery. Choose 3 of these. You may choose the same mode more than once. Neat. Mode 1, search your library for a cave card, put it on the battlefield tap, then shuffle. Mode 2, put 3 +1/+1 counters on a cave you control. It becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with haste that's still a land. You can also just destroy target enchantment. Remember that you can choose these modes more than once. So for 5 mana, you're ramping 3. And that's actually kind of good, just in and of itself. Just that mode is kind of neat. To ramp Trace for 5 mana. Let's come on a little bit, man. Like, I like that you can also, late in the game, you can make like creatures out of your lands get on in. That's kind of nice. And destroying enchantments is also obviously a sweet mode, considering the card does other things. In like best of 1 or, best of 3 before you have access to your sideboard slots, this allows you to blow up like difficult to deal with permanent types you might not otherwise be able to deal with alongside your like Boseiju and stuff. So you only get like 1 or 2 Boseiju in every deck. You got to have other stuff blows up enchantments, and this does that while also like ramping 2. Like, blow up your enchantment, ramp 2 for 5 mana is actually pretty sweet because it gets you to 7 mana, which is all you really want to get to in the first place in standard. So just okay. Like, the more I look at the card, the more I really actually kind of like this. It's a great payoff for caves. But speaking of caves, there's a whole mechanic or 2 or 3 or whatever that allows. But speaking of caves, there's a whole mechanic or 2 or 3 or however many there are in this set, ridiculous, that all revolve around going deeper and deeper into them caves. So let's first take a look at Descend. This will not get confusing by the end, I promise. Now, to take a look at the Descend mechanic, we got to see Didact Echo and Ukenbach, the Great Mistake. There's another one, but I'm going to show it to you in just a second. Instead, let's look at Didact Echo first. This is 5 mana, 4 and a blue for 3/2 Spirit Cleric. When it ETBs, you draw a card. It also has Descend 4. Didact Echo has flying as long as there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. So this reminds me, and pretty much everyone else on the internet who was there, of a mechanic from the plane of Innistrad a few years back called Delirium, and that was a really, really fun mechanic that a lot of people loved. And I've already seen some people on the internet today be like, this is a dumb mechanic. It's like, well, it's because it's like Delirium. And it's like, no, we love Delirium. Remember, we like Delirium. And I get how it's a little derivative and overlappy, but I still like this mechanic the last time we got an offshoot of it. I'm going to like it this time. I like putting stuff in my graveyard. I like graveyard shenanigans and whatnot. And even though this is just like a 5-mana 3-power guy that draws you a card, it's really, really drafty. I still think the overall vibe of the mechanic is cool. So let's see what else we got. Yukenbach, the Great Mistake, is 5 mana, 3 a black and a blue for a 6/4 skeleton horror with vigilance and menace. This has Descend 8, 4 a black and a blue to return Yukenbach, the Great Mistake, from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. Activate only if there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard and only as a sorcery. If a creature with a finality counter on it would die, exile it instead. So I guess we're introducing yet another new, not mechanic, but counter type in this set. Rather than just saying, if this creature would die, exile it instead, they're gonna make it a counter type because everything has to be a counter type now. I think this is somewhat clean, but honestly, I'm on the side of reducing the use of counters in Magic the Gathering to make the board state a little bit more clean and easier to keep up with and all. So I don't love the addition of this new counter, but I get the reason why they thought it was necessary, so I'm not going to gripe too much. That said, this is kind of neat. I get why it's just an uncommon, though. It doesn't have any real evasive ability. You can count Menace, but I don't. So it's just kind of a discounted crawl worm with 2 keyword abilities. I'm actually kind of selling it to myself. That can come back from your graveyard precisely once, but it takes 6 mana at sorcery speed and a bunch of permanents in your graveyard, not just cards in your graveyard, permanents in your graveyard to be able to do this. So this looks like a big old blue-black limited creature that you get in your sealed pool and he helps you win a game or two, but probably doesn't do much in standard. But next, let's look at a banger of a card with Descend. This is the Ever-Flowing Well. 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a legendary artifact. When it ETBs, you mill 2 cards and then you draw 2 cards. Descend 8 at the beginning of your upkeep. If there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, transform the Ever-Flowing Well into the Myriad Pools. This is a legendary artifact land that taps for a blue mana. Whenever you cast a permanent spell using mana produced by the Myriad Pools, up to 1 other target permanent you control becomes a copy of that spell until end of turn. First of all, yes, I'm glad you asked. I will take any other possible way that I can to turn 3 blind mice into a copy of itself, make it a token, and then keep copying it with its own ability. God, yes, I want to keep doing that with more cards than just like Tamiyo. So this is a way to do that, but it's also, in case you didn't notice this, this is 3 mana for draw 2 cards. That's a divination that also puts a permanent on the table, which I think is worth something, historically at least. You mill 2, which is actually really sweet. It kind of fuels its own Descend cost, right? Because it's putting cards into your graveyard. That's also very sweet. There's things you could be doing with those cards in your graveyard. Sometimes milling 2 cards is really sweet. And then, somewhat late in the game, I think you can time it to the mid game. It's just going to become a land that's good enough. I honestly think that like a 3 mana, mill 2, draw 2, put a permanent on the table, and then later in the game it becomes a land that starts tapping for mana. Oh, that's good. That's just good in and of itself, but it can also just create copies of like creatures and artifacts and enchantments and stuff. Come on. So good, man. I know that you have to wait like a pretty good little ways into the game and get it set up and all that, but I think in the meantime, it pays you off okay. Now, I don't necessarily against every deck in standard, like against Azorius Soldiers, mono red, do I just want to waste my turn 3 by doing this and nothing else and just getting smacked in the teeth? Like, no, I don't want to do that, but I still think there might be a place in standard for something like this. Just huge payoff. It's a little bit of ramp and it's card draw. What else do you want in your Magic cards? Oh, you want to do goofy commander stuff too? Well, this does goofy, it just does that. So again, just kind of checks all the boxes. I don't know what you want out of a Magic card if you don't want this in some way, shape, or form. It's a cool card. Okay, so that was the Descend mechanic. Now let's look at a different mechanic that's not completely different, but it is different enough that it is basically completely different, but it is not called Descend. It is called Descended. Okay, again, not confusing in any way. So let's go ahead and look at the one card we have that mentions Descended or Descending or whatever. Let's look at it. It's Blood Rage Mycoid. Apparently there's going to be fungus in this set. There's a few of them just today, but this is 4 mana, 3 and a black for a 4/3 fungus. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, create a 1/1 black fungus creature token with this creature can't block. Now, you descended if a permanent card was put into your graveyard from anywhere. So again, just to clear this up real quick, descend is having X number of permanent cards in your yard. Descending or descended is when you put the permanents in your yard to begin with. They gave these two keywords very similar names, and I just really don't get the reasoning. Maybe it's because they're similar things, and so they gave them similar names. I think it was a bad decision. I will die on that hill, but this card is kind of cool. It's only going to give you like a 1/1 every single turn, and it's only your instep, so it's not like constructed playable, but it's kind of cool. I like it. But hey, I'm Dev here again. There's actually one more mechanic that mentions descent and descending and descend. How many different conjugations is one word can we use on mechanics in the same set? Apparently they really wanted to set the record on that. So let's look at fathomless descent as a mechanic real quick. So let's look at Song of Stupefaction and Souls of the Lost to illustrate this new mechanic here. Song of Stupefaction is a great name for a card, and it just reminds me of Disturbed. I get stupefied. This is 2 mana. 1 and a blue for an enchantment. It's an aura that enchants a creature or a vehicle. When it enters the battlefield, you may mill 2 cards. It has Fathomless Descent. Enchanted permanent gets -X/-0, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So yes, in case you're following along here at home, both Fathomless Descent and Descend care about the number of permanent cards in your yard, but they are not the same thing. Don't think they're the same thing. They're not. I don't even know how this works at this point, honestly. This card's bad, by the way. But Souls of the Lost, it's all right. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for a star/star+1 spirit. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. It has Fathomless Descent. Souls of the Lost power is equal to the number of permanent cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that number +1. Okay, so you know, if you know me, do you not know me, that I like a good goif, like a Stick Fingers or Cruel Somniface. There's a few of these in Standard right now, as a matter of fact, and I really like that deck. So getting more of them, always going to support it. And this doesn't even care how many creatures are in your yard. It cares about permanence. And I think that's actually makes it going to be huge. It's going to be a big old boy by the end of things, especially if all you have is creatures. It's still going to be big, but when you have the opportunity to add all the other permanent types, lands included, this thing's going to get big, and that's why you have to sacrifice a thing or discard a card or whatever. But I'm kind of into that. I like the idea of this as a reanimation enabler because it allows you to discard the card. I like that it allows you to sacrifice a creature in Aristocrats decks at a really low cost, and even in those Stick Finger decks, it lets you sack your Undead Butler or your Gnawing Vermin or something like that and get the dies trigger while also putting a creature in your yard, unless of course you exile the Undead Butler. I see you commenters, but anyway, sweet little card here, and I think that it does have some work to do. But there's actually, I think, only one more new mechanic that we need to cover before we get to just the normal cards from today, most of which look really good. But still, it's a lot of mechanics. I don't even remember what all we've covered at this point. Explore, Discover, Descent, Descending, right? Something like that. And then Fathomless Descent. So that's 5. And then we got one more here. That's so many. We got one more here with Craft. There's a few cards that you craft. What's that all about? Let's find out. So let's look at Idol of the Deep King to do that first here. This is 2 and a red for an artifact with flash. When it ETBs, it deals 2 damage to any target, and you can craft with artifact for 2 and a red. What does that mean? You can pay 2 a red and exile this artifact, plus exile another artifact you control or a card from your graveyard that's an artifact. Return this card transformed under its owner's control, craft only, as a sorcery. So what are we getting for combining this with an artifact? We're getting Sovereign's Makwahedals. Again, super sorry if I mispronounced that. It's an artifact, it's an equipment, and when it ETBs, you attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +2/+0, and if you do have to equip this beyond the first equip, it is equipped 2. I think this might be just kind of good on a baseline level. Now, they did make this a common, and there's a reason for that. But still, it is a 3 mana instant speed card that puts an artifact on the table and does damage to any target. So just like a red-white artifacts deck with like Patchwork Automaton and stuff like that, and there's a ton of other cards that deck has access to that might actually be pretty sick, this could be okay in, 3 mana is kind of a lot, and I'm not going to deny that. And it sucks that crafting is a sorcery, so you can't get the equipment at instant speed or anything, but there are going to be, especially in the deck I just mentioned, plenty of other artifacts in your graveyard or in play or whatever. Really better to use one in your graveyard, right? But still, you're going to have plenty of access to other artifacts. You can craft this up, put it on a guy, get on in. So I think that this might actually be like halfway playable, like a 5.5, you know what I mean? But not quite there, but I am somewhat impressed by all of the things it does. Up next, we got a fun one. It's Throne of the Grim Captain. This is 2 mana for a legendary artifact. You can tap it to just mill 2 cards. Neat. And you can craft it with a dinosaur, a merfolk, a pirate, and a vampire, and you have to pay 4 mana. So that's 4. Exile this and all of the permanent types from either your graveyard or the battlefield, and then you transform it into the Grim Captain. This is a 7/7 legendary skeleton spirit pirate. That's awesome. With menace, trample, lifelink, and hexproof. And when it attacks, each opponent sacks a non-land permanent. Then you may put an exiled creature card used to craft the Grim Captain onto the battlefield under your control, tapped and attacking. Okay, so this looks like a lot, right? You have to have all 4 of the signature Ixalan creature types probably in your graveyard. Before you can even do this, you have to do it at sorcery speed. It costs 4 mana and a total of 6 mana invested in all to make this happen. I still think might be worth doing. I really look at this guy, you know, like he's got hexproof, which I think is a big freaking deal, plus trample and lifelink. He doesn't have a real evasive ability, but your opponent is pretty incentivized to block and kill this guy. But even if they do, they have to spend 2 guys doing it, and this guy has lifelink. It's really sweet, but if they want to kill him with a removal spell, they just kind of can't. And I think hexproof is always a really, really good ability to have on just about anything, and it's not an ability that we see that often anymore. So I actually think it might be worth the work, you know? I mean, it lets you mill cards yourself, which you might be wanting to do for other reasons beyond just getting this thing to flip over. But 2 mana to start milling yourself 2 every turn is not the worst investment in the world. And to be quite honest, 4 mana to get this guy eventually, like, that actually seems great. So yeah, you have to build your deck in a super specific way with a bunch of pirates and vampires and merfolk. Who doesn't want to do that? Counterpoint, who does not want to do that? I certainly do. So don't be surprised if you see this sometime on stream, and don't be surprised either if you see it doing some things. I think this might actually have something to it. But next, let's look at spring-loaded saw blades. That's just pretty cool, honestly. It's 2 mana, 1 and a white for an artifact with flash. And when an ETBs, it deals 5 damage to a tapped creature an opponent controls. You can craft it with an artifact for 3 and a white. So what happens when we do that? We get Blade Wheel Chariot. It is a 5/5. Crew 1, and we can tap 2 other untapped artifacts we control to crew it too. So you're telling me this is a flash removal spell that also counts as an artifact? I'm telling you, that is a thing that matters, but it is a flash removal spell that crafts for just 4 mana into a freaking 5/5. The easiest to crew 5/5 in the history of vehicles too, man. Crew 1 or just tap 2 whatever's, you know, clues, treasures, foods, whatever you got over there. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't say non-token, just untapped. So really, really easy to crew your 5/5. It is a total of 6 mana to invest in this whole thing, but it's kind of a removal spell on a 5/5. And like, whoo, like a little bit, like it's kind of sexy. So I'm a little bit into this, to be honest, if you can't tell. But probably the coolest craftable of the day is the Enigma Jewel here. This is a single blue mana for a legendary artifact that ETB's tapped. You can tap it to add 2 colorless mana, but you can only use that mana to activate abilities. You can also craft with 4 or more non-lands with activated abilities, and that costs 9 mana. It costs 9 mana and a bunch of other things with activated abilities to be in your graveyard or on the table. 9 mana. But you get Locus of Enlightenment. This is a legendary artifact that has each activated ability of the exiled cards used to craft it. You may activate each of those abilities only once each turn. Whenever you activate an ability that isn't a mana ability, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. So they were really scared of this card. It costs 9 mana. It costs 9 mana. It goes directly into Simic Cauldron, by the way. And because it does that, if you remember correctly, Simic Cauldron, or Mono Blue Cauldron for that matter, both produce infinite mana. They produce infinite mana, so 9 mana is not really a big deal. Right? They don't care at all about that. So, but they might not also really care about flipping this thing over, right? Because they basically already got the game won when they have infinite mana. What do they even need this for? Oh yeah, they need it because it's a single mana for 2 mana. That activates ability. That's good, right? You're going to play like Omen Hawker or whatever it's called in your deck. I think it's called that. Maybe I nailed it. But yeah, you're going to play the 1 mana guy that taps to give you 2 mana for activated abilities. This is just more copies of that, right? So I kind of like it a good bit. I know that it's legendary, so you're not going to play all of them in your deck, but it's copies like 5 and 6 of Omen Hawker. I could see this making a great deal of sense. So neat little card. I can see that they are really leaning into the like activated ability nonsense in the last couple of sets, and I like it, but I'm also not sure that I like it. But I do, but I don't, but I do. Okay, so we're finally done actually talking about like mechanics and blood and blah, but there's another thing I want to cover real quick before we get to new cards. Let's look at some old cards. We got to see a few reprints today, and they're all extremely hype, and I didn't expect any of them, so let's go ahead and look at these. We start with Chart a Course and honest to God treasure map, because you need a treasure map if you're going to chart a course, right? A chart a course is 2 mana. It's 1 in the blue for a sorcery. You draw 2 and then you discard unless you attack this turn. This is a very good card. Can safely say that because I played against it for 2 years. Everyone played it, no matter what. It's good. It's a really, really good card, man. Just take my word for it in case you never played against it. You will very soon. Chart a Course is awesome, and I'm kind of glad to have it back, but not as glad as I am Treasure Map. I love Treasure Map. And again, anyone who was actually here on the channel like 5 years ago, whatever it was, probably knows that about me. It's 2 mana for an artifact. You can pay 1 and tap it to scry 1 and put a landmark counter on map. Then, if there are 3 or more landmark counters on it, you remove the counters, transform it, and create 3 treasure tokens. It transforms into Treasure Cove, which taps for a single colorless mana, or you can tap it and sack a treasure to draw a card. That's right. It's a 2 mana artifact that gives you ramp and ridiculous card draw, and also becomes a land. So it's ramp for that reason too. Ramp 2 different ways and card draw. Like good. Yes, it's as good as it looks if you've never played with this card. I know it looks a little slow and clunky and all that, but in these control decks and even a few mid-range decks back in the day, this thing rocked. And also occasionally rolled. Just a really, really sweet card, and I promise you that. Again, don't have to take my word for it. You'll probably play against Treasure Map multiple times, and I mean multiple dozens of hundreds of times in the next couple of years while it's available in Standard. It's a really good card, and you will see if you do not believe me. This is a kind of a weird one, but we also just got a straight reprint of Gishath, Sun's Avatar. It's the same card that it was last time. Nothing's changed. Why would anything change? We got a whole Phyrexian invasion come in and really change the landscape around here, and whole political factions are completely decimated. But Gishath, I mean, why would Gishath be in any way affected by any of that nonsense? It's just the same thing. It's 8 mana, 5 in Naya colors for a 7/6 legendary dinosaur avatar with vigilance, trample, and haste. When Gishath's Sun's Avatar deals combat damage to a player, reveal that many cards from the top of your library. Put any number of dinosaur creature cards from among them onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Why am I reading Gishath? Even if you weren't around when the card was first introduced, you probably played against it in Commander at this point, I would assume. I mean, a really, really popular card on pretty much every level of Magic the Gathering at this point. So yeah, it's Gishath. I've just read it to you. Was it a nice experience? I hope so. And finally, in the reprint section, they just reprinted Growing Rights of Ixalan. It's same card, same exact card here. It's 2 and a green for a legendary enchantment. When it ETBs, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature from among them, put it into your hand. For the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 4 or more creatures, transform Growing Rights into Itlimok, Cradle of the Sun. It's a legendary land that taps for green, or you can tap it to Gia's Cradle. You can tap it to Cradle. You can tap it for adding a green for each mana you control, or each creature. See, I can't even say it. I can't even say it. This card was actually only kind of good last time it was in Standard. We all expected it to be incredible, and then it was just kind of fine. It was all right. It was in a deck here or there every now and again, but it wasn't like the best thing in the world. It's because 4 creatures is more than you think, especially when you have to pay 3 mana to get this thing on the table in the first place. Yeah, it does put a creature in your hand or whatever, but it didn't usually pan out, and I don't really see it panning out that much in a format with Besiege You and Destroy Evil and Lord of the Third Path and like all of these things that bust up enchantments, tear asunder in like every other main deck. So I'm still not super convinced this is an amazing card, but yes, that is Aegea's Cradle on the other half. So there's always a chance. But all right, everybody, I finally get to talk about new cards that aren't really tied to like weirdo mechanics that we have to learn as a course of education at the beginning of the video. And the beginning of the video is what? How long are we into this? 1 hour and 4 minutes is the raw Audacity file. Wow. So it took us, what are we, 35 minutes into the video realistically? Good Lord. Now we're done with the beginning of the video. We can talk about all the other cards, and there's like 5 of them. So it shouldn't take too long, but I am excited. Let's look at Abuelo first. Abuelo Ancestral Echo is 3 mana, 1 a white and a blue for a 2/2 legendary creature. It's a spirit. It has flying in Ward 2. You can pay 1 a blue and a white and exile another target creature or artifact you control. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. It's fine. It's just fine. It's like one of the better Wind Drakes ever printed. It's a 3 mana 2/2 flyer. That also has Ward 2, which just makes it good, but it also doesn't tap for its ability, which I think might potentially be broken. But altogether, I think the card is pretty well balanced. It's just a 3 mana 2/2 flyer. Usually has to wait to untap to use its ability, and then you've used your entire turn for. So I'm not sure the card is great in constructed formats or on curve or anything like that. But if you're only playing 1 or 2 of them in your deck to do some tricks in the mid to late game, I could see doing that. And I could even see being a decent commander for what it's worth, and in the 99 of a bunch of decks. So it looks like a card kind of geared towards that format. And even Cube, I want to bring up Cube real quick because I do that too often, and maybe I get one chance to do that per spoiler video this season. I'm going to use it on this card. This looks supremely cubable in the sort of Azorius slot that I usually give myself a couple of cards in for each multicolor, guild. So I kind of want to try it there. I like the idea of blinking stuff, and I really like the idea of a Wind Drake that's just kind of difficult to deal with. So sweet thing, it will do stuff if you don't deal with it, and it costs a couple of extra mana to deal with it. So I like that. Let's look at Malcolm in the middle here. Alluring Scoundrel, his actual after comma name is. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 legendary Siren Pirate with flash and flying. Already kind of decent stats, right? Whenever Malcolm deals combat damage to a player, put a chorus counter on it. Draw a card, then discard a card. If there are 4 or more chorus counters on Malcolm, you may cast the card you discarded without paying its mana cost. Bang, a little bit, man. It's pretty good. I think I might like cards like, say, Suspicious Stowaway a little bit more than a card like this. And Sus Stowaway I didn't see a whole lot of play, much to my chagrin. I really like Suspicious Stowaway. I still do, but it still has a chance to see play. Dang it. But anyway, this is pretty cool. An evasive little 2 mana 2/1 flash, which I think is incredibly important on a card like this. That's going to deal, going to draw you a card. You have to discard a card too, whatever. But it's going to draw you a card for dealing combat damage no matter how many counters it has on it. Once it does have the requisite number of counters on it, then suddenly it starts doing really, really busted stuff, right? Because you can just have a 7-drop in your hand and get to cast it for free, which is gross. It has nothing to do with the card you draw, just everything to do with the cards that are already in your hand, which is fairly easy to engineer, right? So that's pretty sweet. Let's not forget that Proliferate is in this environment right now, so we might not have to attack with this all 4 times to get all of the counters on it. But I do want to stress that just a 2 mana 2/1 flash flyer when it does combat damage loot, actually kind of good just on a baseline. But up next, we got to look at the Myco Tyrant. This is 3 mana, 1 a green and a black for a star legendary Elder Fungus. I told you there'd be more than one fungus. This guy has trample, and his power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control that are fungi and or saprolings. This is a fun guy. At the beginning of your end step, create X 1/1 black fungus creature tokens with this creature can't block, where X is the number of times you descended this turn. Remember, you descend each time a permanent card is put into your graveyard from anywhere. Okay, so it's a descended guy. Yeah, I could have put it in the descended category along with the crappy little guy, but I didn't do that. I wanted to save him. So yeah, remember again, there's key differences between descended and descend and fathomless descent, and it's very irritating, and I hate that they did that, but still, I love this guy. Like in a vacuum, this guy's incredible. Again, in Commander, let me bring that format up. I think this is a very super sweet, obviously sweet Commander for the fungus decks, the sapperlings decks. I love that he works both ways, and he might just be in the 99 of your slime foot or something, but he's still awesome in that deck. Keep in mind, and keep this in mind for standard too, by the way, that descended doesn't just count stuff that went to the graveyard like from the battlefield. It goes to the graveyard. If a permanent goes to the graveyard from anywhere, then you have descended. So if you mill yourself 3 and it's, land creature, you've descended 3. You get 3 guys at end of turn. So milling yourself could be like super duper profitable with a dude like this in play. And I really think that's cool too. So a little bit excited about this one. He's no Slimefoot. But then again, nothing is. Let's take a quick look at Poison Dart Frog here, because there's really nowhere else to categorize this card. It's just 2 mana, 1 on a green for a 1/1 frog with reach. You can also tap it to add a mana of any color, and you can pay 2 mana to have it gain Death Touch until end of turn. So it's a 2 mana guy that taps for a mana of any color, and also can chump block reach, and also can gain Death Touch against flying guys too. Like, okay, that's actually great. Can I have 2 chances to bring up Cube in these videos? This is actually really, really sweet in Cube. And for what it's worth, this is one of my favorite creatures in the animal kingdom. I don't think you knew that about me, but I have been kind of in love with Poison Dart Frog since I was 6 years old, and I saw a National Geographic spread about them. So spread, that's a word to use. But yeah, a whole article in National Geographic when I was 6 or 7 about Poison Dart Frogs, and I've kind of been completely enchanted by them ever since. So I like that it's a magic card, and I like that it's actually a pretty decent magic card too. This isn't bad. But next, let's look at Bringer of the Last Gift. This is 6 mana plus 2 more mana. 6 and 2 black. That's 8 for a 6/6 flying vampire demon. When Bringer of the Last Gift enters the battlefield, if you cast it, each player sacrifices all other creatures they control. Then each player returns all creature cards from their graveyard that weren't put there this way to the battlefield. It's living death. You're basically, you're playing living death. And it does say if you cast it, so you can't just reanimate it, which is kind of butts. That would be way too much fun and probably just a little broken. So I understand why they did that. But yeah, at 8 mana, I don't think this actually ends up seeing much play, but it is very cool. And I like the callback. Living Death, one of my favorite cards of all time. Just play that. If you're playing Commander, probably just play that card, honestly. But now let's look at my favorite card of the day, but it's not our last card. It's our next to last card. This is Bone Horde Dracosaur. I keep wanting to call it Bone Hard Dracosaur, but that's inappropriate, honestly. It's 5 mana, 3 and 2 red for a 5/5 dinosaur dragon. Let's go with flying and first strike. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. If you exiled a land card this way, you also just get a 3/1 red dinosaur creature token. If you exiled a non-land card this way, you get a treasure token. So I'm pretty sure this card is bananas. I'm fairly... Okay, so 5/5, flying first strike for 5 mana. That's the correct casting cost. And also you just draw 2 cards every turn. And beyond whether or not you get to play the cards, it just gives you dudes and ramp. Come on, man. That's so good. Wait, is the treasure token tapped? Are the treasure token tapped? Created? Nope. Just create a treasure token. Whoo! Come on, man. I know that it might be sort of fixed Goldspan dragon. I'm a 5/5 flying dragon. I make treasure tokens. And Goldspan's probably better. But again, if you're in the conversation with Goldspan, I think you're doing okay, 5 mana, 5/5. I know. Okay. Address this. Dies to Doomblade. You have to wait a turn to do anything with it. And these are arguments I totally understand. Those arguments are also true of Sheoldred. Shut up. I know it doesn't die to exactly Doomblade. Dies to removal. I should have used that instead. Now, I think if this stays out for 1 turn, this stays out for 1 turn and ends up providing you 2 cards, okay, and a guy, doesn't matter if they kill it. At that point, I think that it's done too much for you, man. You get those 2 cards off the top of your library right after your untap step, so you have all of your mana available to you to cast the cards if you want to. It's 5 mana, so it's right around the time that Big Red's going to be running out of cards anyway. It really needs an ability like this, And then again, even if you don't cast the cards, even if you do, you get ramped to help cast cards that you get off the top of your library. Oh, so good. This is a good magic card. It's also a dinosaur dragon. Last point, and I think the one that just like blows any contention out of the water, Dinosaur Dragon. Beat that. You can't. So let's look at the card everyone's freaking out about, just flipping lids over. Tag. I don't know how to pronounce cards. Tak, Deepest Foundation. This is 6 mana, 4 and 2 white for a 6/6 legendary god with vigilance. If one or more creature tokens would be created under your control, 3 times that many of those tokens are created instead. When Tak dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed under its owner's control. You get a Temple of Civilization. This is a land that taps for white, or you can pay 2 and a white and tap it and just transform it. Activate only if you attacked with 3 or more creatures this turn and only as a sorcery. I like the story of the design of this card, or at least the one I have in my head, because I'm sure that a whole boardroom full of designers and execs were sitting there going, we've got plenty of cards in Magic that double the number of tokens that you cast or that you play or that you get or whatever. There's so many of those, like half a dozen of those. How do we possibly top it? Where do we go from there? And then a guy, probably Greg, it's always Greg, perhaps Jim back there, back of the room, but opposite end of the table down there, he just goes, hey, what if we tripled the number of tokens? And everyone's like, give Jim a raise. That's what we do. Let's print it, send it to the printer. Obviously, this is a commander card, right? This is a commander. I wouldn't be surprised if this was the general. Remember back in the day, people used to call commanders generals? That was I promise you. I swear to you that was a thing. But yeah, this seems like it would just be your commander, even at 6 mana. I will say that if it dies, it becomes a land, and then it can just come back like fairly easily, especially in commander. I can scrounge together 3 dudes to attack with, and then like 3 mana. It's not that much, really. So it's not that hard to bring back. It's really not. I will say that if you're playing standard and you somehow get this card into play, then you're probably going to get hit by a sweeper in a turn or two. I mean, I don't make the rules, just how it works. Follow along. So if they get hit by a sweeper, it is monumentally difficult to bring this card back because you have to like get your board set back up with at least 3 guys that can all attack. Right. So it is a little bit difficult, I think, in constructed environments. And in Commander might be slightly easier, but I also might not be giving Commander enough credit. Who knows? Sweeper's a sweeper in any format, right? So all I'm saying is that does say 3 times. It does say the phrase. Are you doing the math on this? Yes. It does give you 6 tokens for a Gather the Townsfolk, right? And there's other math I don't even really want to do. So 3 times as many tokens is very tempting. It's so good. But 6 mana. 6 mana. It'll be a good commander, though. I'm pretty sure it's going to be the most expensive card in the set. Let me just say that right now. I'm going to predict that for day 1. I don't even know what the other 300 cards in the set are. Pretty sure this is the expensive one, though. Oh, crap. There's one more card to talk about today. And it's actually one of the cards I was really excited to talk about. It was originally in the Discovery category, and I was like, let's save him for later. And then I forgot I was saving him. So there is one more card. I actually really like this guy, especially now. He's a Planeswalker. We're all so proud of Quintorius, man. Let's look at Quintorius Can before we get out of here today. This is 5 mana, 3 in Boros colors, red and white for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker. Look at this passive right here. Whenever you cast a spell from exile, Quintorius Can deals 2 damage to each opponent and you gain 2 life. Let's go. You can also +1 Quint to create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. You can -3 him to discover 4, and you can -6 Quintorius to exile any number of target cards from your graveyard. Add red for each card exiled this way. You may play those cards this turn. I've already seen a couple people on the internet be like, and the ultimate exists. Who cares? I care. It's a Yawgmoth's Will. You get like Underworld Breach or whatever it's called. Breach the Underworld. I forgot. You get a Yawgmoth's Will. Let's put it in those terms. But it's an ultimate. You don't have to pay any mana for the Yawgmoth's Will. You just ultimate the guy and you get a bunch of mana. It's ridiculous. It's a really good card. Exile your whole graveyard. You can play those cards. Come on, it's good. It's not that hard to get in there. It's only a 6 and he starts at a 4. Either way, a 5 mana guy that makes a dude and also not only draws cards. This guy doesn't just draw cards. He just puts a thing on the battlefield like from your library. In a lot of cases, it's going to be better than drawing a card, I think. Very, very sweet. You can also just of course, hit like instants and sorceries and stuff like that with this dude, but I think it's cool. So sometimes, like this is a lot of planeswalkers have either a removal mode or a make a guy mode. This guy has the traditional make a guy mode, but the -3 might be make a guy or it might be removal. Who knows? It could even be a boat. So I just like kind of everything about this dude. 5 mana is an awful lot, but the passive. Let me return to the passives. My favorite thing about this card. We just got adventures. We just got adventures in the last set. So like pretty easy to enable this dude. And there's other ways to cast cards from exile, even in standard. But easily the best way to do it is adventures. So a little Boros adventure deck, cooking up Heartflame Duelists. Like we could make this work. I think this guy's really sweet. We only get 1 planeswalker per set. And this dude doesn't look super overpowered, but he does look really fun. And that's my kind of planeswalker. Well, all right. I have performed the mandatory reload on MTG Previews and Mythic Spoiler. Go to those sites, by the way. They're good sites. But I've done the reload thing, and there don't appear to be any more new cards. So I think we made it. You and me, or whoever you're with your popcorn and your drinks, and you're having fun there, just sitting there with your cocoa, and you're hanging out with me, looking at new cards. I think we've actually made it to the end of our adventure together just for this day, though. Remember, I'm going to pick you up at approximately the same time tomorrow, and we're going to go have another adventure where we look at more new cards. So make sure you subscribe to the sandwich. Is that joke still funny the second time? Probably not, but sub to the channel. There's going to be more spoilers for like 2 weeks, and if the cards are anywhere near as ridiculous as they were today, going to be a good one. But just let me know how you feel about the set so far. I think that even though we've only gotten to see 40 cards from a 300 plus card set, we are seeing some interesting mechanics. I like messing around in the graveyard. I love Explore as a mechanic. I think Discover is a very, very cool looking mechanic. Again, a take on Cascade. I'll take that any day of the week. So we got like Explore and Pseudo Cascade and Graveyard stuff all in the same set. I'm really liking the way it's, panning out so far. Transformable cards, legends that become lands. We got Treasure Map back. Like, again, this set looks pretty sick right now so far to me on day one, but I'm interested in how you feel about it, what your favorite cards are from the day, what your least favorite cards are from the day. How do you feel about Descended, Fathomless Descent? How you feel about them naming all the things that... There's a lot to talk about already on day one, but there's going to be even more before it's all said and done. So do the YouTube stuff. Like the videos, subscribe to the channel, check out the Patreon if you want to reward all the hard work I do around here, because I think I'm worth $1 a month. I'm fairly certain. So go check out the link in the description to help support the channel on Patreon. It makes a huge difference around here. Aside from that, you can check out Twitch. Easy, free to follow me. Link in the description over there. And we will be doing at least one night this week of spoilers over there on Twitch. They're going to be uploaded to YouTube right after I finish the stream, so don't worry about that, YouTube people. But if you want to watch them live and correct me about stuff when I'm wrong, isn't that the dream? Then go check us out on Twitch. Follow me there, and then later on this week, Thursday, Friday, we're going to be doing spoilers for the day on the Twitch live ski. But anyway, I think I'm basically done with this video, and I've got to pack it in because it's probably an hour long. I'm losing my voice. Can't lose my voice on day one. That's not good for business. So I love you all very much, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.